Oh, hi there, boys and ghouls. My name's Megan, if you're new here, and if not, welcome back to Here She Lies, a fact or fiction horror podcast that will have you questioning everything you once held dear. Each week, we'll explore another heart-stopping tale of terror. Some of them are true, and others are just big fat fibs. It's up to you to decide which is which. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. And if you're tuning in via your favourite podcast app, then don't forget to leave a big juicy 5-star review. Make sure you have your say either in the comments box below or by heading over to our Instagram page at Here She Lies Podcast. But before we get down to it, I'll reveal the answer for last week's episode. And for those who need a gentle reminder, You Better Watch Out was about a 12-year-old little girl who was followed to school by the creepiest of Kris Kringles. And when she thought her ordeal couldn't get any worse, he whipped out his very own unicycle. And no, that's not a euphemism. Now, I know this one had a lot of you raising your eyebrows and rolling those eyes, but would you believe that it's 100% true? Even though the names and some small details have been changed to protect those involved, this actually took place in Parma, Ohio back in 2009. Remember the grubby Santa Claus who stalked an innocent middle schooler on the morning of December 9th? He was actually a homeless man named Anthony Russo. In fact, if you look at your screen right now, you can see the Santa suit he was wearing, the candy canes he was carrying, and oh yeah, the unicycle he was riding. According to Anthony's mother, her son started to hear voices shortly after his father's death. And despite the fact that he is now known as Parma's resident child catcher, Kay Russo stated that her son was a good guy who would never harm anyone. However, I'm sure that the traumatized preteen he tried to grab off of the street and her family feel differently. A very weird story, I think we can all agree. But you know what they say, sometimes fact is stranger than fiction. How did you do? Did you get that one right? Don't have a conniption if you didn't. Come inside, warm your tootsies by the fire, as you're about to be served a belly full of fear. Welcome to episode 3 of Here She Lies. I call this one A Secret for Santa.
911, what's your emergency?
You calling me a liar?
Oh my god, you coming? We are coming.
It was reaching closing time on December 15th, 1999, when Enzo Caruso had a stroke of genius. The pizza shop his father and grandfather had built from nothing wasn't doing so great, and he and his mother Rosa had been brainstorming for weeks for ways to drum up new business. Caruso's, a little family-run restaurant situated in Glasgow's city centre, had always been popular with the locals. But when another family set up shop just 3 units away last Christmas, things quickly changed. Mario's Deli. It was new, shiny, and offered a better selection than just your standard Neapolitan pizza. Enzo and his father Joseph watched on every Friday night as their once regular customers snuck past the shop window, headed down the road to the new place instead. It was frustrating to say the least, and of course, after almost a year of competition, the loss of business was evident in their profits. Joseph had opened Caruso's back in 1973 with his dad. He feared that the upcoming new year would be their last. Enzo and his mother didn't want to say it out loud in front of him, but they were worried about this too. So they would secretly huddle in the kitchen every Wednesday discussing new ideas. But nothing ever stood out until that night. One thing Caruso's had that Mario's didn't was that sense of community. Yes, the new setup had all the fancy latte machines and bells and whistles that money could buy, but his dad's shop had heart. You see, Joseph was the kind of man to single-handedly start up the local Feed the Homeless initiative, making dozens of freshly baked pizzas and ciabattas for the event. If he knew you were struggling to make ends meet, he would offer you one of his special discounts, never expecting anything in return. Recently, it had appeared as though all of his neighbours had now forgotten this, caught up in the glitz and glamour of the new cafe at the end of the street. They needed something that would remind the community of that Joe Caruso, but it had to be festive. And then, out of nowhere, Enzo thought of something brilliant. Everybody loves Santa, and what a better way to bring in the families than by holding a Christmas grotto. Joseph was nearing his late 60s, and his carb-loaded diet of pizza and pasta meant he was a dead ringer for old jolly Saint Nick. They wouldn't need much, just the costume and some little cheap gifts to hand out to the kids. Most shopping centres charged £10 per child for the pleasure, so they settled on a fixed price of £2.50. Joseph loved the concept. Locals could save some money on the usual cost of a Santa photo, and Caruso's would hopefully survive another year. For the most part, Joe enjoyed playing the role of Santa Claus. He'd always been a family man, so didn't mind kicking back and chatting to the little ones. Some of them would ask for your run-of-the-mill gifts, such as action figures, remote control cars, the latest Barbie, etc. But others were far more creative. Several parents looked on, cheeks red and flushed, as their precious darlings requested things such as a boyfriend for mummy and a new baby brother. Like any good fake Santa, Joseph never made any concrete promises. He just chuckled and said that he would see what he could do. The grotto had worked a treat, and many families would make a night of it, eating at the restaurant after taking some pictures with Father Christmas. The Carusos could not believe how much business had improved in just a few short weeks, and by the time the 24th of December came, they were forced to turn people away at the door. Enzo always hated working Christmas Eve, wishing he could be at the local pub celebrating with his mates. But his parents needed the extra pair of hands, and so he obliged. Bussing tables wasn't the most thrilling way to spend the holidays. In fact, it was downright soul-destroying. Enzo envied his friends who were at home on their winter break with nothing but time on their hands to do as they pleased. As he wiped up the remnants of a spilled strawberry milkshake, his eyes were drawn towards the door as a man and his two young children walked in. The boy and girl shook the snow off of their hats, treading the slush from outside onto the welcome mat. A flurry of white flecks followed them as they entered. Enzo watched as his mum directed them over to Joe, who was now perched on his makeshift throne, happily munching on a candy cane in between each photo. Something captured the young waiter's attention, but he wasn't sure what. The group looked pretty normal, just a single dad out for a bit of pre-Christmas dinner with his kids. But the more he allowed his gaze to linger, the more Enzo realised something was off about these three. Looking around the shop, you'd be hard-pressed to find a child who wasn't noticeably buzzing with the anticipation of Christmas, some even refusing to sit still to the dismay of their mums and dads. But not these kids. The little boy and girl just stood silently in the queue, waiting their turn. They didn't smile, they didn't laugh. They both just moved up the line, blankly staring straight ahead. Enzo moved closer, clearing plates from one of the nearby tables, the children's father just a few feet away now. The man looked to be in his early 30s, and the expression on his face was even more bleak than his children. Enzo wondered what tragic circumstances had left this seemingly average family of three so gloomy on Christmas Eve. He even felt a pang of guilt, as only a couple of minutes before he'd been feeling very sorry for himself, simply because he'd missed out on having a couple of festive beers. As he whizzed around the floor, sweeping bits of dropped food as he went, Enzo kept an eye on the strange family, who had now caught his mother's attention too. A natural nurturer, Rosa made several attempts at conversation with the boy and girl as they waited, but got nothing in return. This made Enzo nervous as he gestured for his mum to meet him in the kitchen. The two could only talk for a brief moment, but agreed that the situation was a touch strange. Neither one recognised the family, as they'd never been to Caruso's before that night. The man, known only by the name left on his reservation, Mr. Smith, had called earlier that afternoon, booking their last available table. It was indeed a mystery, but one that would have to be solved after the dinner rush, and both Enzo and his mum got right back to work. By this time, however, the mysterious kids were inching towards Joseph, and before he could say hello in his booming Santa voice, the little boy was eagerly climbing up onto his lap. After paying his £2.50, the dad excused himself. The small female toddler in his arms was starting to emit a pretty nasty smell, so they hurried off to find a bathroom. As they did, the small boy's expression suddenly changed. He grabbed Joseph by the collar, pulling him in close, whispering something in his ear. Enzo, who was taking the order of a young couple nearby, saw his father's eyes widen before saying, "Oh, and why is that?" He turned back to the patrons, laughing to himself, figuring this was just another kid asking for an outrageous gift. But as he carried the order slip towards the kitchen, Enzo saw his father shaking his head before gesturing something to Rosa. Not saying a single word, she then moved towards the back office with a small piece of paper in her hand. Enzo was about to follow her when a patron snapped their fingers at him from across the room. She soon emerged, as did the weird kid's father from the toilets. Joseph walked them over to their table and went back to his seat, welcoming the next child for a jolly photo. Enzo tried to get the attention of both of his parents, to no avail, and for a moment he wondered if everyone had lost their minds. What was going on? 10 minutes later, the last group in his section started packing up, and Enzo grabbed the opportunity to go and find his mother. However, just as he'd squeezed his way past the dining families, two policemen walked through the front door. Joseph quickly got up to greet them before gesturing to the same man from before, who was now sitting in a corner booth with his son and daughter. The two officers stormed over to the table before removing the man and marching him to the back of the pizza shop. Everyone, including Enzo, exchanged looks of disbelief and curiosity. A few customers hung back to see if the man re-emerged, but when he hadn't after 30 minutes, most of them gave up and headed home. As his parents went from table to table, apologising for the disruption, another officer arrived to watch over the man's two children, who couldn't have been any older than 2 and 4. The oldest kid, a little boy, kept looking up at Joseph, this bizarre look of admiration in his eyes. As much as he was desperate to know what had transpired, Enzo wasn't shameless enough to ask the cop outright, especially with the 2 children sat there listening in. The next 20 minutes were excruciating as everyone continued on business as usual, ignoring the massive elephant in that room. Enzo felt as though a boulder had been lifted off of his chest as the last couple left Caruso's. Moments later, the odd man was escorted out in handcuffs. His tired eyes were blank and empty. He shot a hateful glance at Joseph as he left. Enzo knelt on the leather seat of a corner booth and looked out of the shop window. It was laden with artificial snow, so he couldn't see much, just the silhouette of 2 men heading towards the cop car. The restaurant was silent, and the 2 kids, who'd now fallen asleep, barely even stirred when the remaining officer's police radio started screeching. Enzo tried to listen in, but the array of numbers and Charlie echoes made absolutely no sense to him at all. The young policeman slid his body quietly out from the table and moved over to Joe. Again, a very nosy Enzo made his way towards the hushed whisper of voices, hoping to catch something. Anything that would shed a little light on this bizarre situation. But Joseph just nodded and quickly gestured for his son and wife to join him at the back of the shop. They obliged, and he promptly closed the door to the office behind them. Enzo was practically twitching with anticipation. Finally, everything was about to make sense, he thought. However, he could never have prepared himself for what came next. Joe, now counting the day's takings while sitting at his desk, looked worn down and colourless, something that, despite all of their recent financial worries, Enzo had never seen before. He sighed a deep and heavy sigh before divulging the juicy gossip that his son had been begging for all evening. But this wasn't gossip. It was something far more sinister, darker, something that Enzo wouldn't have believed had it not been told from his own father's mouth. You see, the little boy who'd sat on Santa's lap just a few hours prior had shared a very important message with him indeed. Unlike all the other children, he hadn't asked for a new Transformer or Wendy house. In fact, he made only one selfless and heartfelt plea: that Daddy let Mummy out of the shed this Christmas. Enzo's mouth hung open. An ugly and hollow expression took over his usually handsome yet slightly goofy face. He searched his thoughts, but before he could question what he'd just heard, his father stated, "The police just confirmed it. They found the mum in the tool shed on bloody Christmas Eve." Enzo stuttered, half surprised that he'd remembered how to speak at all. Was she all right? Was she half dead, they said. But yeah, she'll be okay. Mind you, would have been a totally different story had she been left out there all night. They all nodded in unison before a gentle knock came at the door. It was the officer. Social services had at last arrived and the kids were being taken in for assessment. Whilst closing up, the Carusos kept their heads down. Missing was the usual laughter, and a grim aura circled the deli. In the days that followed, word got out about their dramatic Christmas Eve, and Joseph was hailed a local hero. As for the mystery man who almost killed the mother of his children on Christmas, He was tried and found guilty the following spring. The publicity surrounding the case meant that more people in the community flocked to Caruso's, especially during the festive period. In a way, I guess you could say that thanks to one brave little boy's visit to Santa, both his mum and Caruso's deli would live on to see another Christmas. The end. Oh, wow. That actually might be one of our darkest stories yet. But was it even true? Is there a courageous wee boy out there responsible for saving his mother's life? Did we take this story from the archives of an old newspaper? Or am I just a dirty little liar? I guess you'll just have to wait and find out in next week's episode. But before you scurry off to hide under the covers, it's that time again for a game of 2 truths and a lie. Now, if you remember, last week I had 3 little facts for you. I said that I have a goldfish called Stevie Nicks. I said I have a weird fear of dolls, and also I used to be a professional singer. I have to say, only a handful of you got this correct, so you clearly do not know me at all. I'm a stranger in your house. With that being said, you may be surprised to know that the lie was I have a goldfish called Stevie Nicks, because as much as I love Stevie Nicks, I don't have a goldfish. Yes, I did used to be a professional singer, and as many of you know, I am deadly afraid of dolls. You watch Chucky once as a toddler, it will scar you for life. Now that all my dirty laundry is well and truly out in the open, let's see how you do in this week's game. I am 35 years old. I was born in Scotland. I was once involved in a very bad bus crash. On that deceitful note, I bid you adieu. Find out next week if it was false or if it was true. Good night.
911, what's your emergency?
You calling me a liar?
Oh my god, you coming?
We are coming.